Okay, so let's look at James Monroe and the era of good feelings. And James Monroe is elected in or takes office in 1817 and remains in office until 1825. And so this is he's kind of the last of a certain type of president. He's the last president that really was in the Revolutionary War. We talked about he fought in the Revolution. He was with Washington, but he was very young. Andrew Jackson, who comes around later, he was alive during this time. He did serve in a capacity. He was a kind of a runner for the local militia. But James Monroe was a veteran of the American Revolution, and he still wore knee breeches instead of the longer pants, which becomes the style, or has already become the style. He still wears a tricorn hat, so he's kind of a throwback, or the last of that style of president. And so we're going to look at this era. It's known as the era of good feelings. And notice the smiley face there. But that era of good feelings is going to be relatively short-lived. And this really all focuses on, just as their last video focused on the foreign policy, this is going to be really focused on the domestic policy during James Madison's presidency. And it's really called the era of good feelings. Part of what it is, there's a greater sense of national unity. It's a few years after the War of 1812, and the country has has begun to see themselves more as Americans, not Virginians or New Yorkers, or they don't see themselves just as a citizen of a state as much as they do as citizens of a nation, of the country. And so there's just a general sense of more unity in that sense. But there's also, a greater pride in the nation after the War of 1812. And there's some symbolism that kind of goes along with that. The nation's capital is rebuilt. And, we've got these, the White House has been rebuilt since the burning during the War of 1812. The Capitol has been rebuilt, other buildings in the nation's capital. So these are some symbols. Uncle Sam, this is when Uncle Sam starts to be used. There's kind of a story about who Uncle Sam, where that name comes from, and there's a particular person that was involved in the War of 1812 that is sometimes attributed to this Uncle Sam, but really most likely it's kind of just it was just a made up character, and it's a popular nickname for the United States government. Notice Uncle Sam is U.S. government. So we've just got some American symbolism that kind of helps to kind of show the unity of our nation. But more than just symbols, you can't have you can't have a nation that is unified just around symbols. Symbols can be helpful, but there's got to be some shared values. And some of those shared values are this idea of freedom and equality. But the thing about this, there is some big, huge exceptions to the freedom and equality. So women aren't allowed to vote yet. Native Americans do not have equality or not treated equally. Slaves are not free and certainly not treated equally. And so while there's a sense of shared values by a portion of the population, the white male population, many of those are left out. But it is those values that are also going to be the cause of future movement towards an expansion of that freedom and equality to others. So those values are right even if they're not being shared by all yet. That those days will be coming. And there's also this the value of that we're different from Europe, and yes, probably in that sense they also felt a sense of being better than Europe. There's no nobility, so that aspect of the equality, there's no nobility in the United States. There's not there's nobody that has titles of nobility. There's no lords and peasants and things of that nature. People have don't have that hasn't carried over from Europe, and so that's just a little bit of what goes to explain the era of good feelings. The other part that helps to explain this is kind of the economic system. There's been division in the nation over the role of the government, and some of that has subsided a bit, and it's going to come back, and it's going to come back very powerfully. But there's a short period of time here where there's a little bit of an agreement on the role. The Henry Clay is kind of behind a lot of this. It's attributed. The American system is often attributed to him. It's similar to Hamilton in a lot of ways, and very different from Jefferson. The interesting thing about that, this party that now exists is the Jeffersonian Democratic Republican Party, and so this party has, though, kind of adopted some of the ways of Hamilton more than Jefferson's, at least as economic policy goes. So some key parts to the American system is, first, that government does have a role in encouraging economic growth. It's not that idea of just complete free enterprise where the government plays very, very little role. I mean, it's still the free enterprise system, but there is some more involvement in helping to encourage economic growth. So things like creating a national bank with a standardized currency, and that bank can then also provide credit and loans to other banks and help to kind of keep those banks the smaller banks in check, and making sure they're making good loans. Because when the first Bank of the United States, when its charter expires, those other banks, they start to lose a little bit of control. They start to make bad loans, and that causes problems for the government. Next part of the American system is tariff on imports. Now, how high that tariff should be varied among these people, among even people that supported this American system. It wasn't like everybody agreed on the exact rate, but the basic idea that yes, we should have some tariffs on imports, and that does two things. It helps American industries. It makes imports from other countries more expensive, so Americans can create those goods and compete better, but it also provides money to help pay for infrastructure. And infrastructure is a key word here, roads, canals, things of that nature. And that infrastructure will help to unite the nation by making trade easier and travel easier, and so people are interacting with others from other places more, and so there's just a greater sense of national unity. And finally, and what goes with that, so the tariff makes infrastructure possible, but then infrastructure is also the third part kind of the American system. And the idea that the federal government should be involved in building roads and canals, the national government should. That part is not as popular with a lot of people. This is part that the Jeffersonians kind of hold on to a little bit more. They don't necessarily like the idea too much. So there's some of infrastructure that's built by the national government, but a lot of it is not. It actually ends up being built by the states. States will build the roads and canals and things of that nature instead of the federal government. So some of the other leaders that support this system that are also a part of this era that Henry Clay dominates in many ways is John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. So he supports a tariff to a certain extent, a smaller one probably, because he's from the South. They would prefer a smaller one. He supports the national bank even. He agrees with this idea of an infrastructure, but he is going to later that's going to change. Not the infrastructure as much, but just having the federal government involved in these things, he's going to resist federal power, especially when it comes to slavery, in the name of states' rights. And so Daniel Webster is another one of these leaders. So he's from Massachusetts. He supports the national bank, supports tariffs, supports an infrastructure. He opposes the War of 1812, which Henry Clay was a war hawk and was very much in favor of, and he's opposed to slavery. So you'll notice all three of these, they don't agree on everything, but they do agree on some key things. Infrastructure being one of them that they're all going to agree on. John C. Calhoun, maybe even less so on the tariffs and the national bank later on, but early on is fairly, it feels okay about these ideas as well, and is willing to support them to a certain extent. So all of that was happening, all that's going on, this local thing or domestic policy issues, and there's a more agreement. There's not even a second party at this point. the Jeffersonian Democratic Republican Party has adopted many of some of the Federalist policies, but have kept some of their own policies, and so there's not a second party that is existing yet. But the Missouri Compromise takes place during Monroe's presidency, and this is where we're going to start. It's the sad face there. We're going to start to see a loss of this era of good feelings. And the Missouri Compromise, basically you've got 11 free states and 11 slave states in 1819. And if Missouri is going to enter the Union as a state, it's already got slavery there. And so that would, upset that balance of power that's between the slave and free states that exists in the Senate at this point. And so there's kind of discussion over what are we going to do. We don't want to allow another slave state in, or this is going to be the last slave state in, or we're going to, maybe we shouldn't allow any more slaves to go into Missouri. And so there's this debate that's happening, and it's a regional, you start to see sections dividing here. Where we've had some unity, this issue of slavery is going to divide the nation. But they come up with a compromise. It's known as the Missouri Compromise, and basically they say, hey, we'll let Maine come in as a free state at the same time that Missouri comes in as a slave state. And then we draw this red line here across the country here, across the Louisiana Territory anyway, and this is going to divide future slave and free states. And this aspect is really, look at this. Look at the territory that is going to be, look at this territory. I keep saying look, but now the pen should work. Look at this territory that would be southern still. Just that would be allowed to have slaves. And then all of this territory would then, in theory, be free states and free territories close to slavery. So the North is kind of winning a victory here, and you're starting to see the population of the North is finally starting to overcome the fact that the South has had increased power because of the 3/5 compromise, giving them more votes than their population really should give them. And so this is the compromise. This solves the problem of Missouri, but it marks a new beginning to the growing sectionalism. Sectionalism has existed. This issue of slavery has existed, but this is kind of a new beginning, a new era of division. This issue of slavery is going to really dog the country until the Civil War, and then after the Civil War with Reconstruction. So the Missouri Compromise and near the end of, really the middle of Monroe's presidency, we start to see a change from an era of good feelings to, slavery is going to divide the nation.